their relationship with vaginas.
Yeah.
And one thing that's made me a little bit jaded about working, when I first came out, I was known as very misogynistic and very pro-men, and I have no problem with that. I love men. I have a very good partner. I have a great relationship with my father. I have a great relationship with men. But then as I've started working with more and more men, particularly as they get more and more successful, they reduce women down to vaginas because they don't have the time to become intimate and connected to their partner as they get busier and get more successful. They reduce them down to sex, and they will risk a very stable, connected relationship with their wife and kids, which might get monotonous, boring. It happens in relationships. They will risk that for somebody who has nothing else going for them but is able to please them sexually. Are the normal men going for connection because they aren't spoiled for choice? But when men are given all the money in the world, do they become more crude in their selection?
I don't know. I mean, the short answer is I don't know.
Right.
But I think the relationship between wealth and promiscuity is pretty obvious, which is that the wealthier you are as a man, the more opportunities you're going to have.
Yeah.
And the easier it is to cover your tracks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you can afford to go get that hotel room for a night or whatever.
And a personal assistant who will send the emails to everybody. Yeah, knows
exactly.
what she's doing.
So that makes sense. Like one of the things that I had Morgan Housel on the podcast months ago, and he wrote The Psychology of Money. And one of the things that he said, money doesn't change people. It amplifies what's already there. Right. So there's probably a lot of men who don't have the self-control or the correct prioritization to be in a committed relationship, be faithful, be loyal, but they also don't have the means to fuck up their marriage.
Yeah.
And so that almost like it puts guardrails around them. Mm-hmm. But then when you get a lot of money, it removes the guardrails. Mm-hmm. So if you are that sort of man, then it's fair game. This episode is brought to you by Timeline, wizards of life science and global champions of longevity research. When I heard about Timeline's secret sauce, MitoPure, and how it could help with muscle recovery and vitality, I thought, sure, fuck it, why not? And guess what? It's actually been great for my health journey. MitoPure is like a Swiss Army knife of supplements delivering a precise shot of urolithin A to supercharge your mitochondria. I don't know what that last sentence means, but it sounds really fancy and important. This boosts your cellular energy and is supposed to add strength and endurance like you're prepping for the zero fuck Olympics. Think of MitoPure as like a tiny Pac-Man gobbling up all the worn out mitochondria that leave you feeling exhausted and cranky, which if you're like me, you're just always exhausted and cranky. Also, if you're a fan of morning routines, then their berry powder is pretty fucking bomb as well. Timeline is giving you an exclusive 10% off your first order. So just hop over to timeline.com/IDGAF. That is timeline.com/IDGAF.
What created the desire from your perspective to not chase more like just very shallow qualities and actually want to get to know women, actually want to connect with them coming from a pickup artist background?
So I was a little bit weird in that it took me a while to admit this to myself because I wanted to be like all broy, man, a man's man, whatever. Mm-hmm. The sex itself was never that interesting or exciting. It was almost the game. It was like the connection and the excitement and the flirtation and the escalation of everything.
Part of things.
That was the most fun. Like it took me a while to realize this, but I actually I would have a night where I would have this like amazing kind of romantic, intimate experience and not have sex with a woman, then just like find a drunk girl at the bar and take her home and bang her and forget about her the next day. Like the latter was just not very satisfying at all.
Yeah.
And eventually I admitted that to myself and realized that my issues are actually much deeper than I thought they were. And that I just kind of have this weird craving or constant desire for intimacy.
Yeah.
I wasn't finding a way to fulfill that in another way, in a healthy way. And I had a lot of commitment issues. And so I think it was a compensation of like, well, I'm terrified of commitment, but if I can just like have all these like romantic flings and like 1 week, trysts, and it can like overcome that, I guess.
So that was the mentality behind it. But do you think that's most men confusing their desire for sex when really it's a desire for intimacy?
No, my experience is that I was the exception. Most men, they're
obsessed with it, right?
Yeah, either like some sort of sexual fixation or in most cases it was a status thing. And I think it was a status thing to come back to your point of like they were the nerd growing up. They had no opportunities. They were looked down on. Now they're 25, 30, 35.
Yeah.
They're really successful, but like they've still got that.
They're stuck at 16.
Yeah, they're stuck at 16.
Yeah.
They still have something to prove. They've still got a chip on their shoulder. And they're like, you know, if I sleep with a bunch of hot girls, then all the guys at work will like respect me, or, you know, then I'll be like the cool guy that everybody wants to hang out with.
And they literally get stuck at 16. I meet men that are 45, 50 years old, and they're still sexualizing 19, 20-year-old girls. And I can't wrap my head around it. But online, they give the advice that that's the way men are. But I feel like you haven't humanized enough women at that age for you to, because when you meet a 19-year-old, you should realize she's a child.
Yes.
You should realize that my desire for her is me being stuck at 16. As an adult male, I should recognize that she's not an adult enough for me to actually, and I shouldn't be sexualizing her.
Right.
But they've pushed past that. And I don't know if that's pornography induced or if it's online information, but they somehow have pushed past their disgust and turned that into desire for girls of any age or any background, and even her financial background. They will exploit that just for their own gains. And I don't know how that's going to pan out.
So another epiphany I had at some point in my adult life was a realization that there is a difference between beauty and sexual attractiveness. That you can have an extremely physically beautiful woman who is not sexually attractive, and you can have a woman who's not extremely beautiful who is very sexually attractive. Like those two things, I think most men just couple them in their brains, and they don't critically think about that. And so they'll see a hot 19-year-old, and their just immediate assumption is like, she's hot, I want to fuck her. And it's they haven't thought through that process anymore yet, and to the point where they would have the emotional, I mean, it is essentially emotional maturity that we're talking about, of like realizing that you know, sexualization is like almost the most primitive form of
evaluating a
person or seeing somebody. And when you open yourself up to kind of these more emotional levels, and the different dynamics that play out between two people, that you can actually lose attractiveness. I remember when I was like, because I worked with a lot of those guys, you know, 45-year-olds who wanted to date 20-year-olds. I never really got it. But I remember when I was like 28 or 29, I went on a date with a 19-year-old. And I couldn't get through the date. I was like, I'm with a child.
Yeah,
like she is literally a child. And like, there's nothing for us to talk about. There's nothing interesting going on in her life. Like, why am I here?
I feel that even when I have therapy clients, so when I have like a 21-year-old might come to me, and I almost feel guilty because I'm like, I'm getting impatient with this conversation and I'm treating you like a child.
Yes.
When really you're coming to me for help. But because their inability to kind of complete their sentences or know their thoughts is totally what should be happening at their age.
Yeah.
But I'm coming at it as a lens as an adult. So I can't imagine being able to sexualize somebody that you know is still so early in their development of intelligence. And I'll get men who will come to me and say, oh, my ex-wife was a narcissist. She was so terrible. I want you to kind of work with my daughter. I don't want her to grow up like her mum. Please work with my daughter. And I'll work with their daughter, and she'll be like a 16-year-old. And she says, my dad is currently dating a 21-year-old and he's 56. And that's making me uncomfortable. So they somehow have not taken any accountability for the selection process.
Right.
They still have that poor selection and then wonder why the women that they're selecting are becoming narcissistic. It's because they can see that you desire only one trait of them and you don't genuinely care about them. You only care about what they add to your status.
Yeah.
So as a woman, she should exploit you because you're exploiting her. So she should financially exploit you, but they want her to be dedicated to him while he is utilizing her for his own status and gain. So I just think if you're a 19-year-old using and abusing a 44-year-old, good for you, because he's doing the same to you. But but he thinks he's sincere and genuine.
It's funny, like, so you know, in the past when this topic has come up, I've gotten a lot of flack from other men who are like, you know, I don't know.
They think we're jealous, and
they're like, oh, Mark's such a beta, you know, like he doesn't get it. But it's funny because I used to think that way,
right?
And then I did enough work on myself emotionally and mentally to when I stopped thinking that way. And what these guys don't understand is that when you stop thinking that way, it frees you to such an extent. Like, it is a prison to see 50% of the population as vaginas.
Yeah.
It's a fucking prison. You are imprisoned by your dick, and you are captured and being forced into relationships that are not making you happy over and over and over again.
Awful.
And there's, for some reason, some men just don't see that. They're like so captured. They have like Stockholm syndrome to their cock. Like they're just like, no, this is what dick says to do. So dick makes me happy. And like it doesn't make you happy.
And I really realized it when I realized that there's a thing called like glory holes where people go into and they go into places.
Did you just find out?
Wait a second.
I discovered this 2 weeks ago because there was a comedian talking about it on TikTok, and I thought he was joking. I genuinely thought he was joking. I thought it was part of a skit.
You haven't met enough men.
Oh my God.
And then somebody told me, no, it's a real thing. You put your penis in a hole and anyone can. And I just thought, imagine being that much of a slave to your impulses, that much of a slave that you are willing to risk it all. That could be a man, woman, child, anyone behind the screen, but you're that much of a slave to your impulses. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I know I'm really late to the party, but that's a normal thing.
The glory hole party.
Is that a normal thing? I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
It is a thing.
Haram,
it is a
crazy.
thing. I do think the part of the excitement around the glory hole is that you don't know what's on the other side.
I can't think of anything worse. Is that okay? So I'm seeing it in what I'm describing is actually what they actually like about it.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, got it. Goodness me. So do you know, if you really get into a man's mind, is it really that primitive when it comes to how they see women on a fundamental level?
No, it's not an all or nothing thing. I think it's when you get into sexual arousal, like we're animals. And so there's some like very base primitive stuff that happens post-sexual arousal. I think, but just because something can potentially happen post-sexual arousal doesn't mean that that's what you always think or feel.
Right.
Like this is something that's actually, if you ever look into like, you don't know what glory holes are. So if you ever decide to get into BDSM, what you'll discover is that they talk about this a lot. That just because you are into something during sex doesn't mean that you are that way outside of sex. So like if you're a masochist and you like to be dominated during sex, that doesn't give the person permission to dominate you outside of sex. Like they're two different realms.
So separate the realms.
Because it really is like people get into things, it activates like kind of the most animalistic part of your brain. And so there's stuff down there that kicks in. And I imagine most men relate to this, that afterwards you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Drew, tell us more.
Well, okay. Actually, I'd like to get off glory holes and BDSM real quick.
Please do.
Go back to your point.
What were we talking about?
So, like the over-sexualizing.
Yeah, the over-sexualizing. That's more important. And I would imagine the use of pornography and the availability would just activate that side of the brain so much.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean,
the dating apps too, social media, it all feeds into that. Pornography is a big one too. I'm a weirdo. I don't know. I don't use dating apps. I'm pretty much off social media. I don't use porn.
Yeah.
And so
amazing. You don't use porn?
No, I
so
don't.
happy for you.
Drew is
He's a gem.
What I've found though from
most
that
eligible
is,
bachelor in podcasting.
Yeah, no.
I'm convinced at this point that Mark started this podcast just to get me a girlfriend.
Well, you
basically.
should. You deserve a good woman.
Ladies.
You deserve a good woman.
Submit your applications.
I'm going to look.
What I've noticed from that though, and I don't know, it's kind of all three of those things: dating apps, porn, social media.
Yeah.
I now have gotten that little voice you were talking about. Like men have this. Oh, I want to be a higher status man, and in the eyes of other men, even too. I just don't give a shit anymore.
Great.
Really, maybe that's part of that's probably getting older as well.
Yeah.
But I've just noticed that I have a far greater need for connection with somebody now before I'm even remotely attracted to them. So younger women, just it's not.
Yeah.
I can't
And
have
I
a
get a lot of
conversation
hate
with you.
because people are always like, "Oh, you're just jealous." I'm really not jealous. I'm very happy in my relationship. And if my husband did leave me for a 19-year-old, it wouldn't make me jealous of the 19-year-old. It'd make me look at him in a different way.
And be like, "What the hell, dude?
What's going on in your life that this is what you have decided to do?" So it's nothing in that sense. It's just more of a sense of what men think when they walk into a room with a woman that's 20 years younger and and smoking hot while they're not. They think everyone's thinking, wow. But what we're really thinking is, how are you stupid enough to not realize why she's here?
Yes,
We're
totally.
not thinking, wow, you're so cool. We're thinking, wow, you're really rich. Other women might look at you thinking, okay, I can also use and abuse him. And other men are looking at you like, oh, you're probably really enjoying it, but how much is she? How much is she? And they're probably thinking they have a chance. So you devalue your status, if anything, rather than enhance it. But they've got because the outward statements will be like, wow, she's super hot. They're looking for those outward statements rather than the internal dialogue people are having about them.
Well, and you raise an interesting point, which is the perception of other men, right? Because a lot of these men who say like, no, you don't get it, you're just jealous or whatever. Yeah. Part of that is that all of the men that they hang out with think the same way as them.
That's what it is, yeah.
They don't realize that the majority of the male population thinks that's immature and stupid. Why would you ever do that? But the reason they're not exposed to us is because it's like, and this has happened many times where I have met a guy who is very impressive professionally, seems very intelligent, has a lot of interesting things to say. And he's like bringing escorts around or dating a girl who's less than half his age. And I lose all respect for him because it says so much about his character and his self-control and his composure and what he values in life. And it just makes me realize, I'm like, okay, this is not a serious person.
And also their emotional intelligence. I can't imagine a man feeling, I don't know how he has to block out that part of his brain where he doesn't care if she enjoys it, if she wants it, if she's lubricated, none of that matters as long as he's achieved his goal. Wouldn't part of the enjoyment of the sexual intercourse be the fact that she wants you and she's so aroused by you? But having to buy her arousal just seems that you are almost compensating her for this bad experience she's about to have. So it's indicative of how poor you think your performance is. That's how as a woman sees it. We see it, you must be terrible at this, and that's why you have to compensate women for their time and for being with you.
But I think part of that is it comes back to the power thing.
Power.
Because it's what arouses them is kind of the fact that it doesn't matter if she's into it.
Oh, wow. Men are disgusting. Sorry. You guys are so weird.
We're turning to Sadia against me. She's like, I don't want to coach these guys anymore.
I think I've just been so naive a little bit with this area of like, because my advice initially was I'm a very traditional woman and I come from a Muslim background. So my advice was always like, what's the problem? You can have a great guy. You know, you'd be loyal to him and faithful and just be good to his family. Like, what's the problem? It's easy to get a man. As I've been working with more and more men, I realize that the underlying trait is none of that matters until you sleep with them in the way that they like. And that's what I realize, and that's what Sometimes, yeah. Or he has a low sex drive, in which case then you're great. Yeah, then you've got nothing to worry about. But if he has a high sex drive and you're doing all of those things without access to you, it doesn't actually, it doesn't actually matter as much.
It also depends on the man. It also depends on his maturity level and his, it's just.
So there's a lot of components.
I have a high sex drive. When I was younger, I didn't really know how to manage that. Yeah. And I think I let it manage me.
Right.
And as I got older, I learned how to manage it.
Right.
And, now I'm married and I manage it. Like it's not a problem anymore. Like at a certain point as a man, I think most men have to make this decision of just like, you can't keep prioritizing it. Like you're just not going to build a good, stable, interesting life for yourself.
It just can't be a priority forever.
If you're following your dick around everywhere. Like it's not a sustainable life strategy. So at some point you just have to decide like, you know what? Sex just needs to matter less than it used to.
Exactly.
And that's fine.
There's a lot of compartmentalization too that men do. Like you've kind of already mentioned that as well. And I think that's how they can separate a lot of those areas. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure how that works out developmentally or whatever, or if something has happened to them or if they're just how they were raised. I don't know. But I think men are just really good at compartmentalizing this part of their lives. Yeah.
That's true. That's very true.
And a lot of the inability to empathize, to connect emotionally, to humanize with women is directly proportional to the objectification of themselves. Like this is something I used to write about and like men... Like I used to try to explain to men. I was like, objectifying women is bad, but it's not just bad because it's bad for the women. It's bad for you. Yeah. When you see women as status objects, you aren't just hurting them. You're hurting yourself because you are basing your entire emotional life around status objects, around collecting trophies and achievements.
That's a very great point.
To impress your guy friends who... honestly don't really give a shit because they're emotionally stunted as well. So it's just a bad game to be playing.
Yeah, they're
period.
objectifying themselves, usually financially as well. That they really are just a financial component. So they're volunteering for that objectification. Both parties are in those circumstances.
Yeah. What is the biggest piece of women's dating advice that is wrong in your opinion?